Eddie Hearns says that Deontay Wilder won't risk ruining a Tyson Fury rematch by fighting Luis King Kong Ortiz. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Let's jump right into it. There's an interview with Boxing Social, link in the description, where Eddie Hearns, he's talking some recent news. I want to give my thoughts. Eddie Hearns says, I don't believe Deontay Wilder will fight Luis Ortiz. I think he'll fight Tyson Fury next. I think that's what they'll do. And the winner will have to fight Dillian Whyte. That's how I see it going. I don't think Wilder now will take the risk of Luis Ortiz, which is very bad on Luis Ortiz, considering they made him turn down the Joshua fight. I think they'll go straight into the fight at the end of the year, and the winner will have to fight Dillian Whyte. I believe it'll be an interim title and a fight eliminator for the mandatory position with Dillian Whyte and Oscar Rivas. It's just a case of boxing off when that will be. It's been 600 days this week since Dillian Whyte has been WBC #1, so we don't have to wait too much longer, but July 20th will be a very important fight for Dillian Whyte's career, because if he wins that fight, he will get a shot at the WBC world title. Listen, I'm going to keep this as cohesive and, fluent as possible and cohesive. Why does Eddie Hearn constantly talk about other people's property, other people's business, almost so much more than focusing on making sure Joshua's all right for his American debut? Joshua just lost. That should be the biggest concern, in my opinion, that Eddie Hearn, because that has shifted the power, and everything's riding on a rematch in the Joshua Ruiz 2 fight. And you constantly hear Eddie Hearn talk about Broner Pacquiao numbers, Spence Garcia numbers, and if Wilder Fury will happen, or how many tickets Wilder sold to the Brazil fight. Now I understand, I guess his plight is, now Dillian Whyte. You see, all of a sudden when Anthony Joshua when he loses, the focus has shifted to actually taking care of Dillian Whyte and, trying hard publicly to show that you're trying to get Dillian Whyte this mandatory WBC spot. But it didn't seem to be as high of a priority. And then now that Joshua lost and, that's hanging in the balance, it looks like he's trying to secure the next big thing. But it doesn't even make sense to talk too much about Dillian Whyte and the WBC spot as he's doing. He's incessantly talking about this, but Dillian Whyte is already scheduled for a tough fight against a guy with amateur experience, probably more amateur experience than Dillian Whyte has, because Dillian Whyte, got into boxing at a different time and was doing kickboxing or whatever. You get what I'm saying? And, we have to see what happens there. Joshua lost, and all of a sudden there's this new, reinvigorated outlook towards making sure Dillian Whyte's being taken care of. Oh, he's been waiting 600 days. Okay, so when he had been, there's 365 days in a year. So half of 600 is 300. So when he had been waiting 300 days, why didn't we see Eddie Hearn all in the video, all in the interview, saying that, hey, it's been 300 days, WBC, what's good? He might have mentioned it, but he's not mentioning it near as frequently as he is now, because his focus was providing and making sure Joshua was taken care of. Now all of a sudden when Joshua loses, it's this new focus on Dillian Whyte, and he deserves the shot. And again, he's playing a battle with that. I don't see how he can win, because the WBC is a private organization and they've covered their tracks. They've already told Deontay Wilder his #1 mandatory was Dominic Brazil. It was on Sky Sports. There was an exclusive. You guys can look it up yourself. There's an exclusive Sky Sports interview what they did last year about August on skysports.com, where they interviewed Dominic Brazil. And in the article, whoever wrote the article says that there's some confusion, but Dominic Brazil is the mandatory. So I have no idea why Eddie Hearn keeps playing the role as if he doesn't know that is in fact the case. And Dominic Brazil satisfied Deontay Wilder's his mandatory. Now I can understand he doesn't like that, but it doesn't make sense to act as if it doesn't exist. The WBC told Dillian Whyte to fight an eliminator. I believe it was the IBF that told Dillian Whyte to fight an eliminator. Eddie Hearn thought he controlled the narrative in the heavyweight division, so he didn't make Dillian Whyte fight in any eliminator. Now he has nothing to show for it other than this number one position, but they told you to fight an eliminator with Luis Ortiz, the WBC, and he chose not to do it. So, I find it funny. Eddie Hearn looks like he's doing excessive damage control. He's saying Joshua's still the number one somehow, even though he got dropped 4 times and he lost. He's now has this reinvigorated energy to make sure Dillian Whyte is being compensated and taken care of, and all these different things that weren't really the case when Joshua was winning. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and I just don't understand why Eddie Hearn is constantly worried about the next man, especially Al Heyman. Oh, I don't think Deontay Wilder is going to fight Luis Ortiz. Well, that's not really any of your concern. It has nothing to do. You don't manage Luis Ortiz anymore. They didn't do nothing with Luis Ortiz. When Luis Ortiz was with Rematch Room, Luis Ortiz was highly ranked, and at a point he was the mandatory for Joshua, and yet and still Joshua never fought Luis Ortiz to this day. And they tried to piece around and move around certain puzzle pieces that they didn't want because they were trying to buy Joshua time to get better or grow or learn or whatever and keep the cash cow, winning. And they met this guy named Andy Ruiz who foiled all the plans. So you stayed away from Wilder, you stayed away from the Dillian Whyte rematch, and you stayed away from the Luis Ortiz rematch because those were obvious threats. And you stayed away from Tyson Fury. Joshua never fought any of those guys. But you will fight the 41-year-old coming off a horrible performance and a loss. That was Klitschko's worst performance in the last decade, his fight with Tyson Fury. He did not look good. Had a long layoff waiting for Fury in the rematch, and it never happened because Fury had his own personal demons and failed drug tests and whatnot. Now all of a sudden, Eddie Hearn is trying to, make it right for Dillian Whyte when he never had this level of attention to Dillian Whyte's whole career. He was Dillian Whyte's a case-by-case basis with Rematch Room. Joshua was the cash cow, and then now you hear all this damage control. Joshua's still number one. Joshua didn't have an anxiety attack. Joshua was not hurt in sparring. This, that, and the third. And now he's trying to, come out and say he believes that Wilder won't take the Luis Ortiz. But that's a Showtime deal or a Premier Boxing Champ and Team Wilder, Team Ortiz deal. He's constantly trying to spin the narrative to favor him. He said, it's going to be a bad look because Luis Ortiz he should have took the Joshua fight. Joshua would have lost to Luis Ortiz, in my honest opinion, especially at 5 weeks notice. You've seen what Andy Ruiz did, and they're different fighters, but Luis Ortiz is a little bit bigger, a little bit longer pause, and he's an awkward southpaw. And people on Sky Sports, like Johnny Nelson, did an interview, which you can find on YouTube, and he said, no, I'm glad he didn't fight Luis Ortiz late notice. He said, Joshua, that wouldn't have been good for him. You train a full camp for Luis Ortiz. So I just think the pressure is getting to Eddie Hearn and Rematch Room, and the walls are closing in. So you're starting to hear more, just rampant interviews where all this, that, and the third is said, but it's really none of his concern if Wilder, Luis Ortiz, Wilder Fury 2 happen. That's a Frank Warren fighter. That's Al Heyman fighters. Why do you care? And it's just like, we got to stop clout chasing. There's like a lot of clout chasing in the boxing game, in my honest opinion. A lot of it, constantly mentioning, instead of talking about Dillian Whyte, Oscar Rivas, Maurice Hooker, Jose Ramirez, promotions that he's actually involved in, he's constantly making headlines talking about the next person. Instead of talking about Joshua, coming back and what he has to do, you're constantly talking about other people's ticket sales. And, I just feel like if more people focused on themselves and their situation, it would be better, not just in boxing, but in life. Who is Eddie Hearn to say that Wilder won't risk it fighting Luis Ortiz? Just because Joshua didn't risk it don't mean Wilder won't, because Wilder's his own man, and Wilder already knocked out Luis Ortiz, and Luis Ortiz let let Eddie Hearns say he ain't looked the same since that fight. So why would everything Eddie Hearns says is almost like a contradiction. He said Luis Ortiz, you know, ain't look good, and he stunk up the joint versus Christian Hammer. Now he's saying that it's too big of a risk for Wilder to fight him. You see how none of this makes sense? That old media shit that don't work anymore. First of all, you said Luis Ortiz ain't been the same since the Wilder knockout. Now you're questioning if Wilder will fight Luis Ortiz, which he announced, you know, and you're going against that and saying, no, he won't fight him. I think he's going to fight Tyson Fury straight away. Based on what? That's not what Wilder said. So if that is the case, I'd rather hear from Shelly Finkel, Al Heyman, Deontay Wilder, Luis Ortiz, you know, or someone involved with it. It's just like Eddie Hearn just putting out his opinion constantly just because he's being asked. And it's like, what is it based on? How many times will the fans allow someone to be wrong? And then, you know, there's no scrutiny for it. He said the Tyson Fury fight wasn't going to happen. It just looks like hate. It just looks salty. There's no other way to put it. He said Tyson Fury Wilder wasn't going to happen in December. He said, oh, Fury will pull out. Fury will get injured. Fury this, Fury that. You know, Fury, I talked to him a couple months ago and he's not ready for that step up. Look at his last 2 tune-ups. And then Fury fought Wilder. Now he's trying to say, oh, yeah, Fury, I had him beating Wilder. Yeah, but you also said Fury would not even step in the ring and wouldn't make it to the fight, or the fight was just publicity stunt. You see what I'm saying? And then same thing with this situation. You said Luis Ortiz looks shop worn and he ain't been the same since the Deontay Wilder knockout. You said he's put up horrible performances and it's not doing him justice because his stock was high after the Wilder fight, but now he hasn't looked good since, and he didn't look good and stunk up the joint with Christian Hammer. But then allegedly you really wanted him as an opponent 5 weeks in when Gerald Miller failed a drug test. You wanted Luis Ortiz to sign for $6-7 million. And then now when he doesn't sign, and then Wilder said he's fighting him, now you're back to saying, oh, I don't think the fight will happen. Wilder won't risk it. So which one is it? You know, which one is it, Eddie? He won't risk it. Luis Ortiz ain't been the same. It's gonna happen. You know, it's a publicity stunt. It's looking real bad. And the more everybody talks and says these things that look bad, the more new media is gonna stay on it and talk about these things. Let me know what you guys think. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. We working.
So if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this on the channel, you can show your appreciation by going to the PayPal donate button or the YouTube support button, and you can donate any amount that you feel is equivalent to the value of this video. Much more to come. Thank you guys for your support. Boxing Ego, the future of boxing.